Hi, I'm going to make a valiant attempt to do a 1.5-hour lecture in 12 minutes. Though it's a little scrambled, don't find me. America needs new housing. It's not a secret. The 650,000 of our citizens who are huddled miserably in doorways or in wretched encampments are only the most conspicuous and visible signs of a national disgrace. There's whole industries and sectors of our economy that are crippled by the systemic lethargy of the housing industry. Faculty housing, farm worker housing, the people who work for cultural institutions in our cities. Everybody is faced with this problem. After Brian's spectacular horror show, I don't think I need to describe the problem. We don't know what it is, but there's less clarity about why it is and what to do about it, or if we should do something about it. There's a complex confluence of separate factors that render the conventional, one might say the inevitable products of the American housing industry as an existential threat to well-established and well-loved neighborhoods and communities across the whole land. There's a conflict. It's a conflict that seriously retards the production of housing in the face of extreme need. The energies of the housing industry are squandered in numberless tiny battles at virtually every planning commission in the country. Sagas of 8 or 10-year struggles to build 10 units are common. Every developer, every architect, every public official, every real estate agent in this room or at this conference has their own epic tale of effort and futility to tell. These individual stories collectively tell a much larger story of a grave national problem. The problem is what the industry provides. I'll begin a sequence of slides from Marina del Rey near Los Angeles Airport. Oops. That's the short summary of what Brian just showed, the ubiquity of the horror. This sequence from Marina del Rey shows what the hegemony of the normative is like, if it really takes over, and it really is everywhere. It's a neighborhood where the only public space is a gas station. It's where buildings have token entrances for non-existent pedestrians, but the real way in is the garage door. There's a welcoming space of a garage, to an elevator, to a double-loaded corridor, which has neither a glimpse of the outdoors, a hint of daylight, a hint of what the weather might be or the time of day. It's a complete freak out for phenomenology buffs and not so welcoming to the rest of us. The problem is what the industry provides is mandated in common zoning practice. The morphology of these offensive generic buildings begins with a fundamental fact of real estate transactions. The value of land is a residual that comes directly from analysis of what can be entitled, i.e., how much can be legally crammed on a site. Once there's an expectation of yield, usually done a capacity study done by novices who haven't heard that buildings have transformers and package rooms and large places of floor plate that don't get any daylight. Once that frequently naive expectation of yield is set, there's no going back, because every element of the project's potential financial structure has been based on that expectation. Fill the box is the imperative, and the role of the architect is debased, creating patterns of 2 colors of cement board and jiggling windows to the degree that it can be jiggled when the plan is a series of stacked blocks. With the role of the architect so debased, it's no wonder that fine and ambitious architects are not gravitated to the housing industry. Portugal is an exception. With the undersupply of housing widely characterized in the popular press as a national crisis, housing advocates have become emboldened in their quest for looser or no controls on density and little or no local review. So what Peter Calthorpe presented this morning as a virtue, as a good situation, is in fact very troubling. More density everywhere is the plea, and the housing industry is at an impasse, torn between implacable need on one hand, the regnant conventions of the housing industry that threaten the very fabric of our communities on the other. I believe that there's some straightforward modifications to these common practices that could do a lot to diffuse this paralytic conflict that has inflated housing costs and reduced housing production to a fraction of what is urgently needed. First, I'm going to try to go through 5 principles in just a few minutes, and I won't do them justice, but give you an idea of what we've been working toward. First is called the principle of loose fit. Loose fit permits a principle that permits sharply increased density, but regulates its form. New York Times and Bloomberg News have run major stories identifying this aesthetic concern, the national issue. New York Times coining the term stumpies to dub these buildings that are sprouting up everywhere. This is an alternative. Brian also showed a beautiful project, Fillmore Station in Los Angeles, in Pasadena, actually, which is a masterful example of loose fit. There was an earlier legislative initiative, called 27, which is the state mandate on density of the sort that Peter Calthorpe was talking about this morning. What SB 827 would have produced is the zoning box that you see on the upper right. What Montalzoides did instead is a loose fit to that zoning envelope, which still is at 100 units to the acre when the densest building in the nearby is 50 units to the acre. So this 100 unit to the acre articulated beautiful complex of buildings related to the local historic vernacular, but it makes much denser yield, is a good example of what I mean by loose fit. My partner John Ellis did this significant study of the principle of loose fit applied to a typical single-family neighborhood with a floor area ratio, they are 0.3 on the upper left. Number 2 shows what the proposed state density mandate would do to fill the zoning box. And number 3 is a loose fit modification of that zoning envelope, where the state mandate gave an FAR of 3.25 to 1, big box. If you reduce the FAR from 3.25 to 3.0, you get an articulated building that makes gestures towards the surrounding context, steps down near buildings that are smaller, and has some notches and cuts that articulates the building in response to its own program. So if there is a zoning ordinance tailored to this site, it might have a maximum FAR of 3.0 and a minimum FAR of 2.75, still far cry from the 0.3 of the existing neighborhood. So that's the idea, is that there is whereas the state density mandates have a minimum FAR, this has a maximum FAR and a range of maximum that's highly articulated enough. You don't get to legislation for this without a whole series of case studies that anticipate all the ranges of site and topography and surrounding and neighborhood character. We've done lots of loose fit buildings. This is in the waterfront historical district in San Francisco, which has its own set of rules. And zoning envelope for this was this lumpy, dumpy blob with an 85-foot height limit on part of the site, 65-foot height parts of the site. And by making a loose fit, there's a notch that goes into the big block, animating the street, and vertically proportioned buildings that have some reference to the historic buildings around. Just a little bit of articulation and a little bit of nuance. You can budget for a little bit of brick cladding, especially thin brick cladding, on a portion of the site relating to the historic building or the historic district. The loose fit enables an architect to use one's own sense of proportion and grace and do some form making within the envelope, which the minimum FAR of the state mandate did not allow. Potential negative consequence of loose fit FAR is that developers would simply choose to build a slightly smaller version of the horrible, dumb, unarticulated box that has proved to be so problematic. Aggregations of horrible little boxes can be as problematic urbanistically as aggregations of horrible big boxes. The idea of serrated perimeter is a requirement for building plans or unit plans with a somewhat irregular or serrated perimeter that will foreclose that possibility. Most American neighborhoods were built one building at a time or very few buildings at a time on small single lots, frequently with narrow frontages. So there weren't large horizontal aggregations of a building form. The serrated perimeter is a way of relating a larger box, larger composition to the smaller parcels of most historic American neighborhoods. Cardella produced this beautiful plan for Borsellino Hat Factory, an industrial suburb of Milan in 1950. Now, we come back to this point, but what the serrated perimeter is what is the biggest building in town, articulates it into a series of masses that are a comfortable fit for the smaller parts of these smaller buildings all around. So the biggest building in town is a proud home for Borsellino workers for 3 generations. No stigma of being in workers' housing, quite the contrary. Handsome and proud address to those industrial workers. This other collaboration of social housing in 1952, Gardella and Franco Albini. Look at the beautiful articulation of the public side of this building with the stair towers and elevators. I discovered that this work, which was done 60 years ago, has a great affinity, or I have a great affinity to it. And buildings that we've done employ this principle of serrated perimeter to loose fit, to fit quite dense new affordable housing into the fabric of San Francisco, or into the fabric of downtown Berkeley, low-income housing of downtown Berkeley across the street from the university. And the serrated perimeter, by tucking a bedroom behind another bedroom, gives a series of notched, vertically proportioned pieces that make a kind of convection fit. The third principle is a way of encouraging and or requiring neighborhood enrichment through the provision of what I've called Noli space. The term comes from the famous 1748 map of Rome drawn by Giambattista Noli, which is a landmark in the history of urban cartography and in urban thinking. In a Noli map, the private zones of buildings are portrayed as solid black, while public or common spaces such as streets are white, as in a conventional figure ground drawing. Noli's innovation was also to make the public or common spaces within buildings the white of the page, thereby depicting linked sequences of space: street, passage, courtyard, arcade, vestibule, ballroom. Noli spaces may be public or private, but to be a device for neighborhood enrichment, at least a portion of a Noli sequence should be visible from public spaces like streets. It's said that Noli maps reveal a city's most precious secrets, encouraging or requiring a prescribed amount of Noli space in certain circumstances will be a significant enrichment of residential neighborhoods, a means of creating new precious secrets. These are projects of ours that have significant Noli space. This is downtown San Jose, 108 units to the acre. I'm not audible.
Closer to the mic.
Closer to the mic? Better?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. Do I have to start over again? This is a big apartment complex for Forest City downtown redevelopment parcel in the middle of downtown San Jose. And it's a perimeter block that has a series of pedestrian lanes that cut through the block and provide great access to the ground floor units on top of the 2 levels of parking. So the fact that the lower units are 2-story townhouses allow a 2.5-story portals to be cut through the perimeter and through the perimeter and into the mid block. And so those lanes are what's called Noli space. In San Francisco, a similar old big block, a mixed income project that's market rate, supportive for housing for formerly homeless, low-income families and elderly, all in different parts of the same group of the block. The perimeter block is bisected by what we call 18.5 Street, which is a lane that goes through the block and has mixed uses in the ground floor. This is a nonprofit that Wilson Street can repair their own bikes. A series of uses like that in the mid-block lane. And then the upper half a level on top of the parking podium for courtyards that have their own entrance employee units from the courtyard. The fourth principle is the single point of access. A big factor in the deadly character of much contemporary multifamily housing are the uniquely North American fire codes that require 2 separated means of egress from apartments. Grim and ubiquitous double-loaded corridor is a single aspect unit that have all their daylight and ventilation from one side, a result of this rule. You look at the entire history of excellent modern housing in Europe and the UK, not to mention several hundred million new one-stair apartments in China. All of the good housing in the world has a single point of access, not double-loaded corridor. Seattle is the first American city to allow the European model of single point access. In California, there's a movement to permit the buildings to follow the European model. called Single Stair Shared Access Reform. It's the subject of a legislative initiative called AB 835. The sponsors of this legislation have done an excellent job explaining its benefits, but even they have not seen the full implications for the integration of dense new housing into existing neighborhoods when combined with the principles of loose-fit and serrated perimeter. So look again at Gardella's apartment plan and get it displayed on the screen. And it has those three principles operating together: serrated perimeter, loose-fit, and single point of access, which gives us a lovely little lobby on each floor, serving 4 units. The final principle we call courts and cottages. American public housing and low-income housing has always been on large sites and at least moderately dense. This has resulted in housing providers and housing authorities ignoring the splendidly rich American heritage of small-scale multifamily bungalow courts and cluster housing prototypes as a resource for affordable housing. They're frequently charming and well-loved precedent models, particularly appropriate for medium-density interventions in single-family neighborhoods or affordable mixed-income groupings in rural settings. This is a project called Britain Courts, which was a couple hundred units replacement for a failed public housing high-rise across the street. And it's a series of 8 plexes around little courts, little parking courts, in an urban setting with small buildings, 2- or 3-story buildings. They're very dense. And there is the classic courtyard housing in Los Angeles by Stefanos Palazzoli's, Jim Tice, and others. That is a great reference for this type, which has potentially much more widespread application than has been used. I end this with a little plea in praise of sticks. Recently, we were asked to design a supportive housing for homeless veterans in 5 units on the new San Francisco neighborhood on Treasure Island. When we were told by the mayor's office of housing, the client, to use a modular, volumetric modular system. When I heard the promoters of the system presented, I thought it was the stupidest way I'd ever heard in my 60 years as an architect to build a building. And unfortunately, I was abashed and intimidated by the political momentum behind the use of the system. And the mayor's office of housing felt they had to do something to block the rent across the public construction. Well, I should not have kept my mouth shut, because the system turned into an utter catastrophe. The promised 20 to 40%, 20% reduced cost, 20% time savings was a total illusion, because the system was a completely incongruent match with the unit plans, which had to be studios, 1 bedrooms and 2 bedrooms, all different sizes. Putting all those different size units in a series of identical boxes was an impossible puzzle. And so the building ends up with 3 patterns, 3 non-congruent patterns colliding with one another: the unit plans, the modules, and the skin. They tried to make the skin expressive of the modules, but then it didn't fit. And the master plan, Skid Row's master plan for the Treasure Island neighborhood, for climatic and environmental reasons, has parallelogram blocks. Try to make a parallelogram out of volumetric modules, so that we're catastrophe. And then the nature of the modular system is that everything is done in the shop. All the systems, the electrical, lighting fixtures, cabinets, carpet, all put on the site before the building had a roof. There would happen to be an anomalous October rainstorm called an environmental river. The change order to fix the water damage from one night of rain was $35 million on a $110 million project. So our beloved sticks, buildings like the one on the right, Fine Arts Building in Berkeley, has everything over it, over the system. Sticks allow you to be adaptive to programmatic works, different size spaces, public spaces, and private spaces. It allows you to respond to topography, particularly if you have the 1-stair perimeter access, which allows buildings to step with irregular sites and to adapt to urban settings. And so the sticks allow programmatic, urbanistic, and topographic contextuality, which no other systems do with such facility and with such refinement as our beloved stick construction, which I think will be with us for a long time. Thank you.